I'm going to teach you how to create a smooth scrolling behavior on your website. The smooth scroll feature enables the user to smoothly scroll a web page to a specific point or element within the web page when clicking or tapping anchor links. Let's take a look. Here's the page that we'll be building out. I have some links at the top of the page, and when I click these links, you'll see that the page is going to smoothly scroll down to that section of the web page. In addition to creating this smooth scroll behavior, we also have an arrow that points to the top of the page that is not initially present. As soon as you scroll down a specific amount on the page, that arrow is going to fade in. So when I click the 3 button, if you keep your eye on the lower right, you'll see the arrow fades in. And then we have the ability to click this and go back to the top of the page. This is a really elegant way that you can create navigation. It works really well on longer pages where you're going to want the user to be able to easily scroll to the top of the page. In addition to creating the behavior with the smooth scroll feature, the website is going to visually show the user that they're moving down on the page to a different area of the web page. In order to create this web page, we're going to be using a combination of CSS and jQuery. Without further ado, let's jump in and see how we can create this web page. I've already created some of the HTML and some of the CSS to give us a jump start in regards to what we need to build to create this particular page. Let me just introduce you to what we have so far. I have a responsive web page. I'm linking out to Google Fonts and loading a Google font that I want to use on this particular web page. In addition, I'm also going to be using the material icons from Google, so I'm loading that icon library as well. I'm pointing out to a reset.css file and a main.css file, which I'll show you shortly. In regards to the HTML, I have a nav element, which contains an unordered list with links. Those are the numeric links that we'll be using for this example. I have a header, which is this top area, and it has some headings and a paragraph. And then I have 3 section elements. The section elements are going to contain an H1 and paragraph information. It is worth noting that I have unique IDs on my section elements. This is important in order to create the functionality on this page, and in addition, I'm using the IDs to be able to set different background colors for the various sections. Finally, I have a footer that contains a link. The link is going to be represented by this material icon arrow. You can see that I'm using the span tag and it's pointing to the navigation material icon. I've added a MI class to the material icon class so that I can more easily target this element. In regards to my starting CSS, I have defined the Google font on the HTML and set the font color to white. You can see that I'm setting background colors for all of the various areas on my web page, and in addition, I'm setting a background color on both the nav and the footer. Then I have some rules for my heading elements, my paragraph element, and for the navigation unordered list, as well as the navigation anchor elements. We'll be needing to create some more CSS in order to get this to look like what I showed you. The first thing that I'm going to start off doing is I'm going to make a rule on all of the body descendant elements. So we'll do that by combining body greater than universal selector. This will get all of the descendants of the body. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to set the height on these elements to be 100 VH. The VH unit stands for vertical height. And if we go ahead and refresh our page, you'll see that all of the elements are going to take up a full height of my page. So if I scroll, you can see that the main header is now taking up the entire full height, as well as all of the sections and the nav and the footer. I'm also going to add some padding, and we're going to add padding of 2 rems and 2 VH. It is worth mentioning that I am using box sizing of border box in my reset file, so when I add the padding, it's not going to increase the overall height, but rather ensure that the height is still 100 vertical height. This is going to simply create some padding around the edges and the top and the bottom of each section on my page. Finally, I want all of the content to be centered in the middle of their respective areas. So we'll do that by using flex. Now, if I just use a display of flex, we're going to be creating multiple columns in all of our elements. This is something I don't want to do. So we're going to change the flex direction to column. This is going to ensure that the flex container is going to display the elements stacked vertically on top of each other. Finally, we'll use justify content and we'll set that to center. When we do this, the content is going to be vertically centered within the containing elements, which is exactly how I want it to display. Now, I don't want the nav and the footer to take up the entire 100 vertical height. I already have a group selector for nav and footer. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to specify that the height for these elements be auto. We're also going to use align items and set that to center. Since these elements are flex containers, I can use the align items on these particular elements. In addition, we're going to use position fixed, and this is going to ensure that as I scroll, the navigation is always going to be present on the page. If we save the page and we refresh, you will see that the navigation does allow me to scroll and it stays present, but it is going to shrink and not take up the entire horizontal width. We will fix that by setting the width to 100%. Now when I refresh, you can see that my navigation is going to take up the upper section of the page. It's going to automatically be whatever height it needs to in order to display its content. Next, let's go ahead and style the navigation. I don't want the navigation to display stacked on top, but rather I would like it to display next to each other. We're going to do that by turning the nav unordered lists into a flex container. So I'm going to display as flex, and in order to spread these out a little bit, I'm going to use a gap of 1 rem. Now you can see that the navigation elements are going to sit next to each other rather than be stacked on top of each other. What we're going to do next is we're going to make a rule for the nav list items. For these items, I'm going to add a background color. It's going to be a very low opacity of white. So I'll use my RGBA value in order to do this. And we're just going to set it to like a 20% white. Then I'm going to add a border. The border will be solid, 1 pixel, and also white. And finally, I'm going to add a border radius, and the border radius is going to be 50%. This is going to create a circular shape around the elements. You can see that the elements aren't quite perfect circles, but they're more ellipses. I will fix this by adding a width and a height that matches. So we're going to add a width of 40 pixels as well as a height of 40 pixels. Now my navigation elements are going to sit inside perfect circles. The issue is that the text is not aligning in the center. So in order to fix that, we're going to have the list items be flex containers as well. Once I turn it into a flex container, I can use justify content and set the value to center, as well as align items and set the value to center as well. If I save my CSS file and refresh in the browser, you can see that now the text is going to perfectly align in the middle of the circles. Now you might have noticed that we no longer see the footer element. The reason we're not seeing the footer element is because we've set the position to fixed, and by default the element is going to go to the top of the page. Currently, the footer is behind the nav element. Let's go ahead and fix that by making a rule for the footer element. Since the only thing that I want to display from the footer is the arrow, I don't really need to do anything about the footer, but I do need to make some rules for the anchor element as well as style out the arrow material icon. So in order to be able to style this link, I'm going to give this a class, and we'll just give this a class value of top. I'll save my HTML and go back to my CSS. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a rule for the footer anchor element, and I'll target that by simply writing .top. I've already styled the color of the text and removed the underline by this group selector that I have here. But now we'll make some additional settings on the footer. So we know that this element is already using a position of fixed. I'm going to set the bottom to 20 pixels and the right to 50 pixels. In addition to setting these values, I also need to change the display to block. And we're going to need to add a position on the anchor element as well. We already have position on the footer, but we're going to have to add position of fixed to the anchor element. Now that we've done that, if we save and refresh, you'll see that the arrow is going to show up near the bottom portion of my page. It will stay and remain in the same fixed position no matter how I scroll along the page. Finally, I'm going to style the material icon element. I'll do that by targeting my MI element, and I'm going to do something similar that I did on these numeric elements up above. So we're going to add a border, a background color, a border radius, and I'm going to add some padding. If we save now and we refresh, you'll notice that now this element is going to appear in a similar looking circle as the numeric navigation elements. Now it is worth noting that I'm currently designing my small screen view first. So if we open up our developer tools and I turn on the toggle device toolbar, you can see that I'll get these scaling handles and I can see what the page is going to look like at a small size. I want to be sure that my page is going to work well at the small size, which I believe that it does. Now, once my page gets wider, I would actually like to restrict the content from getting too wide. We'll do this by adding a media query. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a media query, and I'll set my min width to 600 pixels. We're just going to adjust a couple of things here at the larger screen size. So at the larger screen size, I'm going to tell all of the body direct descendants to have a slightly different padding value. I'm going to set the padding to 2 rems for the top and the bottom and 10 VH for the left and the right. In addition, I'm going to target my navigation element, and we're going to align items to the end so that the elements are going to appear farther on the right. And finally, we'll add a rule to all of the paragraphs, and we'll just give them a max width of 1000 pixels. This will ensure that the content never gets wider than 1000 pixels. If we save the page and we refresh, you will see that now the navigation is going to appear on the right, and I have a little bit more space around the elements. If my page is smaller than 600 pixels, it will revert back to the original mobile first settings that we've specified. Now let's go ahead and let's make it so that when we click on these links, they will actually do something and take us to somewhere on the page. To do this, we're going to use anchor links. Anchor links are a way that you can link to various areas on your web page. We already have IDs assigned to the various sections on our page, so we're going to use those as links. For the one link, we're going to link down to section 1. So the value of the href attribute is going to be hash and then the name of the ID. The href value needs to match the ID, and this only works with IDs. If we save now and refresh, you will see when I click 1, it takes me to the 1 section. When I click 2, it takes me to the 2, and 3 takes me to 3. Now there is no scrolling, it's just going to switch and fill the page with this content. It will link down to that specific ID. We're going to enhance this by adding the scroll behavior, and we'll do that in just a minute. In addition to wanting these links to link further down, when I click the arrow, I want it to go back up to the very top of the page. So I'm going to add an ID to my body element. we're just going to assign a value of page top. And then what we'll do is we'll go down to the link that is in the footer, and we're going to have this link to page top. If we save the page and refresh, you will see if I'm down farther on the page and I click the arrow, it takes me up to the top of the page and displays our header. So now I have the functionality dialed in and my page is working. Now we're just going to make it a little spiffier by adding some CSS and some jQuery. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add the smooth scroll behavior. This is now something that you can do with CSS. This is a fairly new CSS property. It is worth noting that the scroll behavior property allows you to specify scrolling behavior when your page is linking down in this manner. This is only available in the modern browsers, so if you do want to support older browsers, it will simply ignore this, and when you click these links, the behavior will be as I just demonstrated. When we add this one line of code though, look how this transforms our page. When I click any of my links, you can see how the scrolling behavior is now initiated. This is a great way to show your users that they're still on this particular page. When you're clicking the links and it's anchor linking down to the various sections, if it doesn't show the scrolling, it can be a little jarring to users depending on where you're linking to. This scrolling behavior is a great way for single page web applications, and it really adds a nice sort of interactivity to your web page. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to not display the top arrow when the page is already at the top. There's no sense in having this display because if I click it now, it doesn't do anything. So we're going to do that by adding some jQuery. In previous exercises, we added the jQuery and the JavaScript in the head section. That will work fine, but it is also common that you'll find JavaScript at the bottom of your page. In this example, I'm going to put my JavaScript down at the bottom of the page, just so we can practice using a different sort of behavior. The first thing that I'll do is I'll make my JavaScript tags. Then I'm going to use the source attribute, and currently I have the jQuery 3.6.0.min.js file already in my scripts folder. So I've already downloaded this from the jQuery website. I'm simply going to link to that particular file. Remember, when you're using jQuery, you always need to link to jQuery before you add any of your own scripts. I'm just going to make a comment at the bottom of my page so that my page will stay scrolled up, which will make it easier for you to see what I'm doing next. Next, I'm going to create an embedded script tag. And of course, since we're using jQuery, we'll need to create our document ready function. The interactivity that we want to create is we want this little anchor link to fade in if the page is scrolled down a particular amount. What we're going to do is we're going to fade in and out this button on the scroll behavior. We can do that by targeting the window element. So the window element is the window that the content is displaying in the browser. We're going to go ahead and select the window element, and then we're going to use the scroll method. The scroll method will allow us to see if the user has scrolled the page, and if they have, we're going to perform some sort of interactivity. The type of interactivity that we want to create for this example is we want to create a condition. We want to know if the user has scrolled at all, and if they have, we want to do something. If they haven't scrolled, we want to do something else. In order to create this sort of condition, we use something called an if-else statement. So the if-else statement is going to take on this formatting. We're going to say if, and then in parentheses, we're going to pass in our condition. And then what's going to happen is we're going to, within the curly braces, say what it is that we want to have happen. So we are going to perform this if true. And we'll just make this a comment to remind us that that's what's going to happen. After the closing curly brace on the if statement, we're going to write else, and then we'll open another set of curly braces. The else statement is what's going to happen if this is not true. So we'll say perform this if not true or false. Now all we need to do is we want to say what it is that we want to have happen. So the condition for our if statement is going to be if the page is scrolled, if the window is scrolled. We can use our this keyword to target the window. If this meaning the window, and then we're going to use the scroll top method. And what the scroll top method does is it sets or returns the vertical scroll bar position for whatever element is selected. So when the scroll bar is on the top, the position is set to 0. As we scroll down, the position of the scroll bar is going to change. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to say if the scroll bar is on the top, or in our case, we're going to say if the scroll bar is greater than 200 pixels, that's our condition. So if the user has scrolled down more than 200 pixels, that's when we want to make some sort of change. Inside of the curly braces, we'll specify what it is that we want to happen. We've already assigned a class name of top to that anchor element. That's what we want to target. And we're going to use the fade in method. The fade in method will allow this element to fade in if this condition is met. What we need to do next is we need to specify what's going to happen if this is not true. So we need to say what happens if it's false. And for this statement, it's going to look very similar. Once again, we're going to target the .top, this anchor element that we've created, and we're going to tell this to fade out if the user has not scrolled by 200 pixels. If we save and refresh in the browser, you will notice that initially our top anchor link is still visible, but if I use any of my additional links and scroll down on the page, it will be present, and then if I click the up arrow and go back, it disappears. So the behavior is actually working, it just doesn't work on page load. And the reason why is because initially we haven't told the top element to be hidden. That is something that we do want to do. Now there are two ways that we could approach this. We could hide this element using CSS, or we could do it in jQuery. I recommend that we do it with our jQuery function, just in case the user has JavaScript turned off. If we hide it with CSS, they will never see this element. But if we hide it with jQuery, then in case they have JavaScript off, this element will still be present and the user will still be able to use it to navigate to the top of the page. In order to do this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go into my document ready function. We're just going to select the top element, and then we can go ahead and we can use the hide method to simply hide it. Now if I save my page and we refresh in the browser, you'll notice that the to the top anchor link is no longer present. As soon as we scroll more than 200 pixels, it does fade in, and then it will be present for the duration of my experience on the page until I go back to the top. When I go back to the top, it disappears again. So if I either scroll on the page or use any of my links, the to the top button is going to fade in and show. We can then use it, and then once we're at the top of the page, it will fade away again, since we no longer need that button to be visible, since that behavior will not do anything for us. Combining CSS and JavaScript allows us to create an interactive experience that really responds to how the user is utilizing our website. This is a pretty nifty way that you can add some dynamic behavior to your web page. It just adds a little more polish and makes your web page look that much better.